Half-Life Alyx released back in 2020 as the one and only AAA title for VR. It delivered to us what was at the time an unmatched experience, but what if I told you that gaming in virtual reality is growing at an exponential rate? What if I told you that VR is making strides so massive in fact that it's only a matter of time before this legendary game is dethroned and the cracks are already showing? I'm Amalgam, and if there's one thing I understand, it's virtual reality gaming. I was debating whether or not I should review a game you've heard of 1,000 times, but you haven't heard me break it down, and I'm pretty thorough. I think I know just the place to start, so let's pick apart Half-Life Alyx and see how it stacks up to my 2024 VR expectations. Weapon slots play a pretty big role when it comes to being able to immerse yourself in an experience. In this game, aside from your wrists, there are no weapon body slots. With the press of your right joystick, you can open up a menu and gain instant access to all of your weapons, and while this does feel well implemented, it's noticeably dated by today's standards. Pulling objects, on the other hand, is something done on a level that modern VR titles simply haven't been able to reach. In a lot of games, you can fling distant objects to you, but not only does it feel so much better in Half-Life Alyx, it has an actual explanation behind it. You gain access to the Russells early in the game, which are these technologically advanced gravity gloves. When you use them, the objects you're pulling, unlike in most games, fly toward you in a very natural way. This was one of my favorite features about this game when I initially tried it out. On that note, puzzles are an area of this game that even the less spectacular modern VR titles can match in terms of immersion. That's not a bad thing though, because these puzzles aren't too easy, but they're not too hard. They're mini games in themselves, and even the more challenging puzzles are relatively short and enjoyable. Not unlike that really cool minigame where you give this video a like by tapping that thumbs up button below. Gotta love these shameless plugs, right? Anyway, immersive puzzles are pretty much a staple in VR titles like this, and I'm happy to say that modern titles are pretty much already at this level. There is still something that modern VR titles, for the most part, are still struggling to keep up with though. Let's address the obvious hurdle for the competition, that being that this game has some pretty top-notch visuals. The graphics here are better than most modern titles, but that's to be expected when compared to an indie game with a lot less money and time at their disposal. What really sets it apart though isn't even its superior graphics. You can absolutely make do with inferior graphics if the environment is crafted in an immersive way. All that's to say, level design is the main thing separating Half-Life Alyx from its newer competition. The level design is very rich, and there's a lot going on in almost every space. All the areas look like they were actually used at one point. I can't really explain it, but you can enter an area with lockers and it just feels like a real locker room. Even the construction zone where you take on an armed patrol squad feels like an actual construction zone. Again, while great graphics are great to have, level design is the real beast separating this title from its competition from a pure visuals perspective. The good news is that level design at this tier can be replicated by indie games with the right level designers. The bad news, which may not actually be bad news if you love this game, is that there's one aspect of this game that is leagues ahead of its competition. Without a doubt, the audio in this game is AAA quality. The scripting and voice acting are on levels clearly distinguishable from your typical indie game. This game's audio makes it easy to empathize with the characters because their performance is just that believable.
Whoa, wait, I just live here!
Of course, we have to talk about Russell because he is easily one of the best written side characters I've seen in any game. They hired the perfect person to voice him because it feels so natural.
Pretty soon they're going to realize that your dad is not going to talk, and when that happens, he's off to have his brain sucked out.
Russell.
Potentially. Maybe not though. I mean, they could just drill into his...
Stop.
Oh, yeah, still your dad.
His interactions with Alyx actually ended up being one of the biggest highlights of my experience, and that's saying something because this game has a lot to offer. Even the ambient noises in this game are spot on. Enemy radio comms, sounds made by the gravity gloves themselves, and other noises produced by interacting with machinery all feel right at home with the atmosphere of this game. In regards to audio, it'll take some serious effort for an indie game to reach levels this good in a VR title anytime soon. That said, there's an aspect of virtual reality that Half-Life Alyx might be losing its advantage in. There is one thing when it comes to options and motion sickness support that this game does better than the competition, and that's seated gameplay. Half-Life Alyx is the most comfortable seated virtual reality experience I've ever had. I personally prefer to play my VR games standing up, but I like to test things out to see how they work for these reviews. You'll be happy to know that if you prefer to play seated, these controls work so well that you have hours of comfortable gameplay at your fingertips. I mentioned earlier that the lack of equipment body slots feels dated, but this is also the reason seated gameplay is so comfortable in this game. With all of your weapons at your wrists and hands, there is none of that awkward handling of belt, chest, and back slots that you get from other VR games. In addition to comfy seated gameplay, you have full control over your volume settings, which is pretty much an expectation at this point for games like this. There is only a single point of adjustment for your graphics in the performance tab of the menu, but that one fidelity slider does an impressive job adjusting things based on your selection. While it's not perfect, these settings do a good job giving you a balance between performance and visual quality. The added option to adjust light sensitivity is something you don't see in a lot of VR titles, but it's nice to have. I tried out Stride Fates, and that game had some bad light flickering that this option would have done an excellent job compensating for. If you're interested in that review, you can check out the link in the description, but before we talk about how overall immersive this game is, we should talk about the theme first. At this point, I think we all already know that as far as themes go for VR games, this is as in-depth as it gets. Timestamps are below, so you can skip this part if you're tired about hearing about this game's story, but I'll try my best to make this part enjoyably short. Before that though, you should know that if you haven't played the non-VR Half-Life games, you don't need to worry. This title does such an excellent job bringing you along for the ride that no prior knowledge is necessary, but of course there is the occasional treat for those of you who know a thing or two about the Half-Life universe. That said, in this game, you play as Alyx Vance, a resistance fighter who finds herself on a mission to save her father, Eli Vance, after he and his team drop the ball while doing some pretty typical resistance related stuff. With the assistance of her father's good and questionably senile friend Russell, you make your way through the game, undermining the Combine, which is what they call the alien force that has taken over the Earth in this game. Along the way, you'll uncover bits of information with acceptable amounts of wow factor thrown in for good measure. The setting is immersively done, and in playing this game, I can't think of anything I would have changed related to the theme, which is kind of rare for me. Now that we've touched on all that though, we should condense this information and determine just how well this game holds up in 2024. Since we went over the mechanics first, we'll start with that one. Mechanics gets a 4 out of 6. This game features the most immersive version of gravity gloves that other games have had a hard time explaining, let alone adding correctly. Unfortunately, compared to the current landscape of VR, the mechanics alone aren't anything novel anymore. Graphics gets a 6 out of 6 because this game boasts top-notch visuals and superior level design. While the level design is the real separator from the competition, the overall graphical quality is impressive and can even push higher end gaming PCs pretty hard. Audio gets a 6 out of 6. Characters like Alyx and Russell are brought to life in the most immersive way, and the ambient noises perfectly complement the gameplay. Options gets a 5 out of 6 because this game is very beginner friendly. It offers plenty of options to reduce motion sickness and provides an amazing seated VR experience. One gripe here is the inability to fine-tune your graphical settings. Theme gets a 6 out of 6. This game's overall theme is as immersive as it gets, with an S-tier plot that stands strong years later. All that said, this game is still a hard must-have for any VR gamer and holds up exceptionally well in 2024. This game also has nicely integrated mod support, but it wouldn't be fair to add other people's work to this game's score. As such, this game has earned an Immersion score of 5.5 out of 6. There are VR titles that can do what this game does in individual areas, but so far, we don't have one that matches up when you take into account the whole package. Still, 2024 is an exciting year for VR with games like Into the Radius on the horizon, so don't forget to subscribe because I'd hate for you to miss that review. New content is headed your way weekly, so please support the channel with a tap of the like button if you like this review, and until next time, stay immersed.